Good evening, everyone. This work session of the Osseo School Board is being conducted in person. This work session can be, am I echoing? Keep going? Okay. This work session can be monitored electronically by streaming online from the district website, and an archived recording will also be available on the district website. The purpose of the school board work sessions is to build trust and teamwork, to exchange information, and when applicable, to provide direction in order to facilitate efficient and effective decision-making at regular board meetings. The outcome of today's work session, our board members will work toward finalization of the strategic roadmap, receive information on the world's best workforce results, along with information and updates on LRFP budget parameters and LTFM. To acknowledge attendance this evening, I'll ask that board members please state their names, starting with
Director Tamara Grady,
Director Tanya Simons,
Director Heather Douglas,
and I, Kelsey Dawson-Walton, am present. Director Brooks will not be with us this evening, and Director Mosqueda Jones will be joining us shortly. I will now ask Superintendent McIntyre to facilitate this evening's work session. Superintendent McIntyre.
Good evening, board members. So as you're aware, we have new audio and video equipment replacing our outdated equipment. So I do want to take a moment to give a special thank you to Callan Magnuson, our school board video producer, for all his hard work in installing all the new equipment between meetings here, hardware and software to produce our meetings. So we're going to keep dialing it in. I think as we continue to talk, we'll see that come together. I also want to welcome a number of our Osseo area school staff tonight who are part of our presentations, and we appreciate all their time and contributions this evening. I know they've all worked very hard in preparation for you tonight. So we have 5 agenda items scheduled this evening. And as we balance getting through our materials and your questions, we're estimating that our strategic roadmap feedback review should take about 30 minutes or less. Our world's best workforce, probably about 60 minutes or less. If we're on time, we'll have a spot for a 10-minute break at that point. Then we'll pick up with our long-range financial planning budget parameters agenda item, which is about 30 minutes or less as well. And then our long-term facilities maintenance update, which again would be 30 minutes or less. And if we're still on time, we have time for our board calendar review, which with the remaining 10 minutes or so to kind of look ahead. So, and then as always, we can always follow up any additional information after the meeting that you feel like you would need. So to get us started tonight, our strategic roadmap and feedback review and kind of next steps, which could be potentially our final review and discussion of the draft strategic roadmap, which includes mission, vision, core values, strategic directions for our next 3 to 5 years as part of our strategic plan. And just as a reminder, it goes without saying, you put a lot of time and effort into this, and a lot of thought and care in developing the roadmap over a number of meetings going back a few months. This roadmap is one of the final components of the strategic plan portfolio. Other components do include a 3-year operational plan, our vision cards that you'll see next month, in a board 3-year governance plan and department school improvement plans that will come in the future. As you've discussed the roadmap, we've sought your feedback. I want to thank Assistant Superintendent Lehan for his extra efforts in gathering some additional feedback, and you've received that summary of that feedback earlier. Our task tonight is to determine if you, as a board, have any final revisions to that roadmap prior to taking action to approve the roadmap at our next regular board meeting. At least that's when it's scheduled. We have received your board record responses over the last couple days, and after reviewing your feedback, put together those responses in an additional document thanks to Christine, and including any suggested changes offered. So that was at your places tonight and also sent to you this afternoon. So I do want to welcome Christine Robluski, who's been with us many times through the process from Teamworks International, along with Assistant Superintendent Michael Lehan. That's why I wasn't getting any echo, I guess, huh? So Assistant Super Lehan is here as well to answer any questions and help us work towards finalizing the strategic roadmap. So with that, I'll turn it over to Christine and Michael. Thank you.
All right, thank you, directors, Superintendent McIntyre. I hope you're all doing well this evening and that you are prepared to move toward the final steps of your strategic roadmap. And as the superintendent said, this is one of the final pieces. I think we've been working on this since August, when you started the work, looking at all that input that you received throughout the process beginning in early 2020 and then through spring of last year. This is going to be, I think, the third or fourth time you're reviewing this, and now this time with additional feedback. So we did ask you for some suggestions after reviewing the feedback. What is being shown on the screen right now are the highlighted areas with some of the themes that came through from the feedback that we received. We asked three main questions in the feedback. One was, what are the strengths of the draft roadmap? The second question was, what are your concerns? And the third was, what are your ideas for improvement? And so what you received was the themes of the feedback that was received from open-ended responses and discussions. And not surprisingly, some of the themes were polar opposites of each other. So where some people said that they saw equity as a theme of strength, for example, they also saw it as wanting to be more included in the strategic roadmap. You also saw a theme of people wanting to see that the strategic roadmap would result in outcomes. So while that's not the role exactly of the roadmap, it is the role of the operational planning and some of the other steps that will come next. So your community does want to see the district to be held accountable for the actions that result as part of the operational planning and the next 3 to 5 years of your strategic plan. So I'm going to hand it back to Chair Dawson Walton and see if we want to roll through any suggested changes from board members this evening. I know we don't have 2 of your board members here. At least one of them has responded to the documents.
Thank you. All right, well, and just a reminder, this is a work session, so I'll just open it up to if anybody has any, points of discussion or one of the strategic roadmap.
So I guess my question is, we have a piece of paper here in front of us with some additional input from board members. Is there any further discussion on this input, or are we going to move forward with what is on the page right now?
Well, this is the discussion right now, so if anybody has anything that they want to add. You brought up the equity. There's several comments around equity. It's been brought up many times in our discussion of, do we include it in the actual roadmap, or is it operationalized within the operational part of some of the outcomes that we're talking about in the accountability, and where does that live? Because I do think we want to get to a point where we can finalize this, absolutely. But obviously we want to have an opportunity for some discussion.
I really don't have specific suggestions for the wordsmithing, but looking at the feedback, on the one hand, the feedback is, yes, that's great that we include equity, but I also feel like some of the feedback calls us to be more actionable, to be more specific, to be more intentional. And some of that does kind of break down to the difference between governance and operations. And I know that our teams are really working on creating clear, actionable items to work on our achievement gap and our safe and welcoming schools issues. But I just want to point out some of the feedback was, and I quote, District 279 needs to acknowledge racist inequities exist and that we need to determine the foundational systemic change that is needed. I think that's a really important point, and I think that was really included in a lot of this with our ECAP process. But to point out that, talking about achievement and reaching our dreams without the foundational change, these are just words that benefit our white scholars, as one person wrote in. In addition, I will look forward to having more opportunities to talk about accountability, not only for the system, but for ourselves. And I feel like maybe that's not really the appropriate place right now for the strategic roadmap, but I just want to call attention to the fact that we need, as somebody wrote, the words in this document need to be backed up with action, and that school leaders that fail to demonstrate anti-racist action should be held accountable, and that includes all of us as well.
I think that if there is a desire to provide strategic direction, that school leaders demonstrate anti-racist action and be held accountable. If they don't, that's a pretty significant statement that I would want to understand more, and that these words only benefit white scholars is a significant statement as well. That if there is something, it seems to indicate that this feedback, and we're missing two people, if there is a belief that this strategic roadmap only benefits white scholars in our district, I would want to have some serious discussion about where on this document that is the case. Because the outcome is on this page that we want all students to succeed at the highest level of academics. We want to provide a rigorous education for all students, and when we fail to do so, we must hold everybody from the top down accountable for that. And I think we're gonna have some interesting discussion tonight when we see our results later. So I think it's really important that that be surfaced right now, if that's a belief regarding our document that's setting the entire tone for what we expect in our district.
I think it's not a one or the other. I think it has to do with specificity as well as making sure that our intentions are clear. It's one thing to acknowledge inequities. It's another thing to acknowledge systemic inequities and being foundational to all of our systems. And it's still another step further to create actionable steps to solve those inequalities.
Well, I think wherever we observe inequality to exist, it should certainly be called to the forefront and addressed. I think the problem with some of this language that is as generalized as the person providing this feedback seems to indicate. So we can talk about anti-racism, we can talk about equity, but if we're not being specific in the nature of where it exists and what we plan to do about it, then again, it is words on a page, either way.
So I guess I have a question to Corey or Michael or even you, Christine. When I think about how this really started, this equity really, oriented strategic plan, it came, we started with the ECAP process, the econometrics, just to first understand the equity landscape of our district. And I know, we talk, in most of our reports, everything we do, it is equity focused. And what I'm grappling with when I look at some of these kind of comments at the end, I don't want to spend, time continuously wordsmithing when we know that, the kind of the operational piece, the vision cards that, that are upcoming. That's what's really going to be the meat and potatoes of what's going to make a difference in our district. So I guess what I'm asking is, so I'll say, when I look at our strategic roadmap as it is now, I do, the vision statement, I love the vision statement, and I definitely believe in our mission and the core values and the strategic directions. So my question is, how do we then hold accountable operationally our value as a district around equity? When we look at the world's best workforce and all the data, how do we start to hold our, district, the principals accountable through, whether it's evaluations, how do we start to kind of be really explicit about our outcomes within the plan? Because I think that's the piece that I just need to kind of see that or understand that again, so we can kind of move forward with this.
Yeah, so I appreciate the questions. Can you hear me okay, first of all? Okay, thank you. So I think a lot of your questions really get into the details of the operational plan and the vision cards, and I'll have Mr. Lee here and talk about the vision cards in just a minute, but I'll give you one example.
Okay.
So in the operational plan that, I provided you a draft portfolio here in the last couple of weeks, and those documents included the draft 3-year operational plan with strategic direction, letter B, build and nurture a culture of achievement by providing content-rich, rigorous, and individualized pathways. One of the learning work initiatives is equity, accountability, and learning systems, measurements, tools, and evaluation, et cetera. So it's a very specific initiative that is in the learning work phase this year. And then we move into year 1 and year 2 and beyond around a lot of the elements you all just mentioned, right? So the development of that through line from the strategic plan to department level to school improvement plans down to individual evaluations, right? And that's being driven in part by our vision cards that's coming next. And so maybe, Michael, if you want to talk a little bit more about that. I think you're hitting on the things that are the actual actionable things that are in the operational plan that you wouldn't necessarily see in the mission, vision, core values, and because those are higher level aspirational things we all hope to be, right? We're all striving for. And I get the concept of it sounds a little flowery. Well, we're trying to be something we've never been. So that's a little bit a part of that versus the real practical, concrete actions that we're going to take over the next 3 to 5 years to achieve those aspirations, and then how we're going to measure our progress, right? And how are we going to know if we've hit those targets? So you want to add a little bit more about your work on vision cards since that's coming next month?
Sure. Excuse me.
I feel like we're in concert together. Like
I know it.
Singing,
I'll be your hype man.
dueling pianos.
So yes, and some of my colleagues, Jenna, Tom, and Jeremy, are my colleagues who are working on our team to develop the vision cards. But the intent of the vision cards is a really comprehensive document. A comprehensive document that is going to take qualitative and quantitative measures to understand how we are progressing towards vision. Specifically, and then beyond that, what we're going to do is align our pulse surveys, our staff stakeholder surveys to begin to align how we can populate the vision cards. So to the extent in which accountability shows up, it's going to be there in the vision cards from a system, from department to site goals. And then beyond that, there's going to be some guiding questions that we'll have. What we're naming them is mindful critical questions for ways in which our administrators, our teachers, our directors are going to begin to think about how they're developing their department plans, their site plans, whatever the case might be. And they are going to be grounded in an equity mindset to ensure that we are framing our goals, our orientation to our goals in a equitable manner. So the vision cards will get to that specificity that we're looking for in this document.
Pause there.
Thank you, and welcome, Director Mosqueda-Jones.
Thank you.
Hopefully that maybe fills in some of the gaps you're feeling with the details, right?
Yep.
And I think
Okay.
that's natural, knowing that your role as board in this roadmap piece is, again, that really high-level aspirational roadmap for us. So when you approve that, that sets the pathway for us as administration to operationalize it and make that real.
Yeah, I mean, I feel two ways about it. Like, I feel the word equity is something that we see so much, so I'm like, man, it's missing from here. But when I read through the core values, especially the core values, I mean, that's what equity is, and so that's what, and so I do think the power and the impact will be in those vision cards, and so, I am supportive of this. The one thing I was going to ask is somebody had said taking out potentially behaving in the transparency piece. I don't know if anybody wants to speak to that.
I suggested that based on the feedback that we received from the groups that evaluated it, that was one of their recommendations, and I suggested that not necessarily removing it entirely, but I didn't have a word in mind necessarily to transplant in its place. And so I would, sometimes when we use the word behaving or behavior, it has a little bit of a negative connotation with it. And that was, and I don't know what the person who gave us that feedback was thinking, but when I saw that feedback and when I looked at it myself, I was kind of a little bit jarred and taken aback and thinking maybe we could use a different word to convey what we're getting at. But overall, I feel like we've worked so hard on this, and our teams have worked really hard on this, and everybody has put so much effort into this, and overall I think it's a really incredible document that really encompasses the things that we've worked so hard for and talked about and the things that we're striving for. So, I mean, I'm not opposed to having the word in there, directly opposed to it. I I just think that maybe that might be one word that we might consider revising.
I do think we're all in agreement that the outcome is that behavior demonstrated, modeled, whatever the right word is that our behavior demonstrates transparency. So I think we're getting in deep into the semantics now, but it does sort of have sort of a
Yeah.
negative attitude or condescending.
Yeah,
type of
I could go
sound.
with, I know, I hate to wordsmith, but modeling or like,
Does the word
Functioning.
interacting work in there?
I like the word interacting. Modeling, I
Modeling,
like, interacting, there was another word I was thinking of, too, demonstrating.
yeah, you said that, functioning, conducting.
But if that's the last word.
Yeah, I
we
mean,
have-
Right. That's, I hesitated about even writing it in a suggestion because I was like, thinking about all the work we've done on this, so.
Chair Dawson-Walton, I do echo and appreciate the statements that you made about our core value, because I think that really is the outcome, is when we do these things, that means we have achieved equity, that this is what it really looks like and touch it, we have something we call see, do, touch, like this, when we do these things, this is the very essence of it, and this is what we're trying to get to for everybody. So I really appreciate the tangibility of these words versus alternatives.
Okay, one last time, and then I think we can stamp of approval. Anybody else? Tamara, Director Mosqueda Jones, do you have?
Assuming there were no major changes when I was in my other meeting. I'm good to go.
So
Okay.
I'm hearing the possibility of one word change.
Yes.
And that's behavior at this point?
Yep.
And we will bring that back. I will connect with your superintendent, and in your final packet before your regular board meeting, we will offer you that opportunity. It sounds like that's the only change. Otherwise, we're ready to move forward for action at your next regular board meeting.
Yes.
All right, thank you. You just needed to be able to have that discussion.
Yes, I appreciate it.
'Cause
Thank
we've
you for
had
all your
several.
work, Christine.
Thank you.
It's with
All right, thank you very much.
us, and, okay, thank you.
Board members, I just want to acknowledge one more time the amount of work you put into this to this point, and be very proud of your efforts to find common ground on something you can all get behind. I know we're in the final tweaks, and it's only because you care. You want it to be everything you hope for, right? So I'm just want you to take a moment, maybe after this meeting, or maybe after you approve it, and just be really proud of how much we've accomplished in the last 2 years while dealing with a whole lot of other stuff, and still get this done, because it was one of your very high-level goals when I started in this role, to get this work done, and it's been a challenge with juggling so many other demands on our system, so good job. All right, I'm going to move us forward. Thank you very much for that, and tonight we also have our team with us. Our second agenda item is our presentation on our World's Best Workforce elements that's required by the Minnesota Department of Education that we have to submit each year. So along with Michael Lehan, our Assistant Superintendent of Equity and Achievement, we have other team members. I'm going to go right through there because I want to make sure you get recognized. Jeremy Willie, our Director of Learning and Achievement. Jenna Johnstory Arstead, Coordinator of Data and Assessment, and Tom Watkins, our Coordinator of Data Assessment as well. So thank you, team, for being here tonight, and we look forward to your presentation. Turn it over to Jeremy and Michael.
Good evening once again. With me this evening, as Corey alluded to, is Jeremy Wilde, Director of Learning and Achievement, Tom Watkins, and Jenna Johnstory, Coordinators of Data and Assessment for the Department of Learning and Achievement. This evening, the outcome of our presentation is to examine various data points related to Osseo Area Schools' World's Best Workforce Plan from the 2021 school year, and to learn about current strategic improvement actions to positively impact this data. We added a variation to this year's presentation. This year, we included evidence from site improvement plans to offer a transparent through line from mission, strategic initiative, to site action. As each of you knows, each action step aims to improve the quality of education our scholars receive. At this time, I welcome Jeremy Willie, Director of Learning and Achievement. Jeremy.
To begin our conversation around this work, we want to highlight the connection between our newly developed strategic directions as a part of our strategic planning efforts and World's Best Workforce goals and legislation. As we look at a multitude of data points, it's important that we begin by grounding ourselves in the statutory requirements related to World's Best Workforce legislation. The 5 World's Best Workforce goals, which you can see listed here, are as follows. All children are ready for school. All third graders can read at grade level. All racial and economic gaps between students are closed. All students are ready for career and college. And all students graduate from high school. Each year, school districts are required by the state to submit a World's Best Workforce plan and share the information in a public meeting. This plan is due for submission on December 15th, 2021, and it will be posted on our district website. Here, as you just reviewed, you will see the 6, what I refer to as soon-to-be strategic directions for Osseo area schools. Of these strategic directions, 2 are specifically connected to this presentation this evening. The second, which is build and nurture a culture of achievement by providing content-rich, rigorous, and individualized pathways. And the 5th, which is lead, develop, and align our district toward continuous improvement.
The first World's Best Workforce goal that we would like to highlight in this presentation is all children are ready for school.
This slide shows the pre- and post-assessment achievement data for pre-K students in our system using the Teaching Strategies Gold or TS Gold assessment. This assessment is designed to provide us with information about the extent to which pre-K students are ready for kindergarten. It measures early literacy, early numeracy, and social emotional skill development. You will notice that the lighter blue bars show the pre-assessment proficiency percentage, while the darker blue bars show the post-assessment proficiency. One point to mention is that in the 2016-17 school year, the pre-assessment was administered in the winter, while the following 3 years, it was administered early in the fall. The additional learning time before the assessment that year explains why the pre-assessment percentage was higher than in subsequent years. Another item to note is that the post-assessment results from 2019-2020 were not available, as we were unable to administer this assessment due to the pandemic and the subsequent school closure. As we can see, the fall pre-assessment score for the 2020-2021 school year was lower than in previous years, with students entering school in the fall having a proficiency rate of 9%. However, after a year in our district pre-K program, the proficiency rate was 83%, which was on par with previous years. This fall to spring growth in proficiency, an increase of 74%, overall was the largest in the 5-year history of this assessment. In kindergarten, student learning and growth over the course of the year is assessed using the Early Reading Fast-Bridge assessment. In the pie chart on the left, we can see the fall to spring growth on this measure for last year. The data in this chart shows us that approximately half of kindergarten students made typical or aggressive growth. Typical growth is defined as 1 year of growth, and aggressive growth is defined as a year and a half or more growth. The bar chart to the right shows a percentage of kindergarten students that were identified as being low risk over the past 6 assessment seasons. A student earning a score that places them in the low risk range means that they likely do not need academic intervention and tend to be at grade level in their mastery of standards. Looking at these data, we can see minimal impact from the COVID-19 pandemic. Comparing students in the winter of 2020 to the winter of 2021, we see an 8% difference, which has an effect size of 0.18. Effect size is a measure of the amount of impact a variable has on 2 different groups. In this case, that variable is the pandemic, and the groups are the students tested in the 2 winter seasons. Generally, an effect size of 0.20 to 0.49 is considered a small effect size. So the effect size of 0.18 is a negligible difference between the students in those two winter assessment groups.
As we can see identified on this slide, the following actions are being taken at the district level to positively impact this World's Best Workforce goal. The first action that I would like to highlight focuses on the strengthening of data collection and analysis to drive instruction. Data from our TS Gold assessments, which were referenced earlier, can be used to evaluate programming and to make actionable instructional decisions. This information can be shared with teachers as students transition into kindergarten. A second area of focus surrounds end-of-the-year success criteria for programming. This has been developed by pre-K teachers in collaboration with pre-K leaders to assess student readiness based upon the early childhood indicators of progress provided by the Minnesota Department of Education.
One of the strategic actions that we wanted to take this year in this presentation, as alluded to earlier, is not to only highlight district actions that are being taken in response to the data presented, but also draw specific attention to the identified strategies that are on school improvement plans, our SIPs, at our sites across the district. Here you will see an example of specific actions that Fair Oaks Elementary has articulated on their SIP for this year that focuses on phonics, comprehension, intervention, and support for learners in the area of reading. The second World's Best Workforce goal that we would like to highlight in this presentation is all third graders can read at grade level.
Okay. On this slide, we can see the results of the 2021 Spring Curriculum-Based Measurement for Reading Assessment, or CBMR, which is a FastBridge assessment. In this chart, we can see two pieces of information. The first are the blue bars, which represent the percent of students whose scores indicate that they are at low risk for needing reading intervention. The second are the yellow portion of the bars, which show the percent of students who are at very low risk and are projected to be on track for college and career readiness. There was little variability in the overall percentage of students that were low or very low risk across grades, with grade 2 having the highest combined percentage at 56%, and grade 5 having the lowest at 47%. Students not earning scores that place them at low or very low risk will be provided with extra supports for accelerating their learning.
On this next slide, you'll see that we will begin looking at our Minnesota Comprehensive Assessment, or MCA results. This graph shows the percentage of proficiency for elementary students overall, including our 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade students, in the areas of reading, mathematics, and science. The gold bar on the left column of each of these three content areas shows our percentage of proficiency in Osseo area schools. The dark purple bar on the right column of each of these three content areas shows the state's percentage of proficiency overall. As you can see, Osseo area schools is approximately 2% below the state average in reading. Previously, we were 4% below the state average. We are at the state average in math, while the last time students were assessed, we were 4% below the state average. Finally, we are approximately 4% below the state average in science. Previously, we were 12% below the state average. It is important to note that only 5th grade students take the MCA in science at the elementary level. As we can see, as identified on this slide, the following actions are being taken at the district level to positively impact this World's Best Workforce goal. Multiple actions indicated on this slide focus on curriculum adoption cycles in reading, mathematics, and science. The program improvement process is currently underway for English language arts. It is in the pilot phase for science, and it is in the implementation monitoring phase for math. Additionally, professional development has been offered throughout the summer into the school year and will continue to be offered to support teachers with various strategies they can utilize to accelerate, with students to accelerate their learning. Providing a multi-tiered system of support at each of our sites with reading and math interventionists will support this acceleration of learning as well.
Here you will see an example of specific actions at Rice Lake Elementary around ensuring that all students are successfully able to read at grade level by the time they enter third grade. These specific articulated actions referenced in the school improvement plan highlight these actions that will be taken at Rice Lake. The assessment measures utilized to measure success and the specific individuals responsible for this action.
At this point in the presentation, we'll be transitioning into MCA results from our middle schools. This graph again shows the percentage of proficiencies for middle schools overall. This would be our 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students, again in the areas of reading, mathematics, and science. As you can see, Osseo area schools is approximately 2% below the state average in reading. Previously, we were 4% below the state average in reading. We are 4% below the state average in math, while the last time students were assessed, we were 7% below the state average. We are approximately 6% below the state average in science. Previously, we were 12% below the state average. Again, it is important to note that only 8th grade students take the MCA in science at the middle school level. Finally, let's take a look at our MCA results for our high schools. This graph shows the percentage of proficiencies for high schools overall, so this would be just our 10th and 11th grade students in reading, mathematics, and in science. Osseo area schools is approximately 2% below the state average in reading, which was also the case the last time students were assessed. We are 5% below the state average in math, while previously we were 8% below the state average. Finally, we are approximately 3% below the state average in science. The last time students were assessed, we were 6% below the state average. It is important to note that only our 10th grade students take the MCA in reading. Our 11th grade students are the only ones who take the MCA in math. And students completing biology at the high school level take the MCA in science.
The third World's Best Workforce goal that we would like to highlight in this presentation is all students graduate from high school.
The top section of this table contains four-year graduation and dropout rates for the last 8 years, as reported by the Minnesota Department of Education in 2021. These are also called on-time graduation and dropout rates. We anticipate receiving results for the class of 2021 sometime in the spring. Graduating from high school, ideally on time, may be our most fundamental equity indicator. Each student crossing the stage to receive their diploma celebrates, and their whole family and community celebrates, for good reason. Researchers also tell us that each graduate confers a net benefit to taxpayers of about $144,000 over the graduate's lifetime. You can see that when we add our four-year graduation and dropout rates together, it's only about 89%. That's because at that point, about 9% of our students were continuing in high school or had an unknown status. One enduring strength in the district is that we had a higher graduation rate than the state for each of these years. We were 5 percentage points above the state in 2014 and are currently about a half a point above. Another strength is that the district dropout rate was lowered by 1.5 points from 2019 to 2020, bringing it back to levels comparable with previous years. However, one challenge is that the district dropout rate remains above the state average for the second year in a row. In the bottom section of the table, we're looking at 7-year rates, which is the status of students 3 years after their typical on-time graduation year. At this point, when we add up the graduation and dropout rates, we can see that only 1% of district students are still continuing or are unknown. As we saw with the 4-year rates, our district 7-year graduation rates have remained above the state average for each of the past 8 years. For most of these years, Osceo's 7-year rate has been above 90%, and the statewide average has not achieved that rate once. However, Our 7-year dropout rates have also been above the state average for all but one of these years, indicating that after 3 years of additional efforts to engage students and help them complete their graduation requirements, about 8% of our students have dropped out in recent years. In order to understand how our students are doing, we will review the 4-year graduation and dropout data for the class of 2020 released by the State Department of Education as a part of the North Star State Accountability System. The 3 large districts in Minnesota that are most comparable to Osseo in terms of the demographics of the students served are Bloomington, North St. Paul, Maplewood, Oakdale, and Robbinsdale. By looking at how specific student groups perform relative to these districts, we get a better understanding of our strengths and challenges. First, we can use the color coding to see that in all 4 districts, Asian, white, and female students continue to have the most favorable graduation and dropout rates. We can also see that the least favorable rates were for homeless students. And second, when we look at specifically at Osseo students, we can see that our overall graduation rate is now the best rate among the 4 districts. However, our dropout rate is the highest among the 4 districts, underscoring a challenge that we identified relative to the state rate. Third, the student groups in Osseo with the lowest graduation rates in 2020 were SLIFE, homeless, special education, and EL. SLIFE students have limited, interrupted formal education, and this is an important subset of English learners. Fourth, the student groups in Osseo with the highest dropout rates in 2020 were SLIFE, EL, Hispanic, and American Indian. Finally, our district has the largest gender gaps, with female students 9% more likely to graduate on time, and male students more than 3 times as likely to drop out. This means it's important for us to break the racial and service groups out by gender. Female and male Asian and white students continued to have the highest graduation rates and lowest dropout rates in 2020. In contrast, low graduation rates continued for male students who were American Indian, multiracial, or Hispanic. In addition, black male students saw a 13% drop in their graduation rate from 2019 to 2020, now among the lowest in the district. The highest dropout rates are still for male students who were Hispanic or American Indian. One positive finding was that the dropout rate for male multiracial students decreased by 14% from 2019 to 2020. Turning to gender within service groups, we can celebrate that female students receiving free or reduced price meals have the highest graduation rates, and female special education students have the lowest dropout rates. We can also celebrate that dropout rates decreased 3% or more for female and male students experiencing homelessness or receiving free or reduced price meals. Female special education students also were much less likely to drop out. However, we're continuing to see low graduation rates for homeless students and decreasing graduation rates for EL students. Male EL students also saw an increase in their dropout rates. Among females, SLIFE students had the lowest graduation rate and the second highest dropout rate.
As we can see identified on this slide, the following actions are being taken to positively impact this goal. Supporting students in identifying paths to fulfill graduation requirements, engaging in a deeper analysis of individual students' credit accumulation and graduation status, identifying patterns to inform supports and further preventative measures earlier, creating 279 Online, a fully online school to provide more choice and flexibility for students to graduate on time, and participating in credit recovery programming designed around standards which students have not yet met in order to stay on track for graduation.
Here you will see an example of specific actions at Maple Grove Senior High School around ensuring that all students are successfully able to graduate from high school. Highlighted on this slide are strategic actions that Maple Grove is taking to ensure that each student is able to successfully complete graduation requirements in the area of mathematics. Again, these specific articulated actions referenced in the school site improvement plan highlighted the actions that will be taken at Maple Grove Senior High School. The assessment measure utilized to measure this success and specific individuals responsible for this action. The fourth World's Best Workforce goal that we would like to highlight in this presentation is all students are ready for career and college.
Next, we'll take a look at ACT College Readiness benchmark information for the 2021 graduates by test subject and compared to the state. The blue bars indicate the percent of district graduates that met the ACT benchmark for each subject. The yellow line that extends beyond the blue bar indicates the percent of students statewide who met each subject ACT benchmark. The bar furthest to the right within the chart indicates the percent of students that met all 4 subject benchmarks within the district compared to students statewide. We can see from this chart that district graduates generally trail the state rate by between 10 and 16%, with the largest difference being in math, a 16% difference. The smallest gap between district graduates and the state is the percent meeting all 4 benchmarks, which shows district graduates at 9% lower than the state.
These slides were presented to you last year. Will not receive higher education results for the class of 2021 until later this month. Here we're comparing graduates from the classes of 2019 and 2020 within each student group to see higher education enrollment before and during the COVID-19 pandemic. White, female, and Asian students had the highest rates of higher ed enrollment in 2019 and 2020. 5 groups had higher education enrollment rates that were below 60% for one or both years: American Indian, Hispanic, EL, students receiving free reduced price meals, and special education. 5 groups had an increase in higher education enrollment or had a reduction that was less than the nationwide drop of 4%. These groups were American Indian, Asian, multiracial, and female students. Hispanic, EL, and special education students all had a drop in higher education enrollment in 2020 that was twice as high as the national average. This slide was also presented to you last year. When we look at gender within other student groups, we can see that in all but 2 student groups, our female graduates in the class of 2020 were more likely than males to enroll in college. The gap favoring females was 20% or higher for American Indian, Asian, and homeless graduates, and 13% or higher for Black, Hispanic, white, students receiving free or reduced price meals, and for special education. The 2 groups in which male graduates were more likely to enroll in college were multiracial students and EL students.
As we can see identified on this slide, the following actions are being taken at the district level to positively impact this World's Best Workforce goal. One action to highlight on this slide focuses on assisting students in designing potential pathways to college and career through our advisory programming at the secondary level. Utilizing the Minnesota Career Information System and the My Personal Plan component, students develop portfolios that support lifelong college and career planning and self-reliance. Also, as referenced earlier, the program improvement process is occurring at the secondary level as well, where we are in the first year of implementation of our new mathematics curriculum resource and in varying stages of implementation with science curriculum resources. Similar to the conversation at the elementary level, the program improvement process is currently underway for English and language arts as well.
Here you will see an example of specific actions at Osseo Senior High School around ensuring that all students are ready for college and career. Information on this slide includes strategic actions that Osseo Senior High is taking to incorporate AVID strategies, more specifically, Wicker strategies to ensure that students have the skills needed to be successful in their next adventures following high school. The 5th World's Best Workforce goal that we would like to highlight this evening is all racial and economic achievement gaps between students are closed.
Next slide. Thank you. First, we'll look at information about the ACT College Readiness benchmarks, as we looked at earlier. However, this chart shows just those students who met all 4 subject benchmarks, disaggregated by race and ethnicity. Again, the District 2021 graduates are represented by the blue bars, and the state is represented by the yellow bars in the chart. 3 years of data are shown to examine trends and differences that may have occurred during the COVID-19 school closure. The first thing we notice when looking at this chart is the gap between student groups in the rate meeting all 4 college-ready benchmarks. This gap is consistent across years. Specifically, there is a gap between white students and students of color. When comparing the rate of white students to black students, we see a gap of 38% for the 2020-2021 school year. This gap has widened over the past 3 years. These data also show that these gaps between students of color and white students are larger for the district students than students statewide, due to rates of white students being higher than the state and rates of students of color being lower than the state. Another insight this chart provides is that within most groups, students statewide have higher rates of meeting all 4 ACT benchmarks than district graduates. This is true except among white district graduates, who have a slightly higher rate than the state across years. A positive result to note is that the district is closing the gap among students who identify as multiracial. The gap between this student group and white students went from 24% in the 18-19 school year to 15% in 2021. On this slide, we look again at the 2021 graduate ACT data, but this chart shows average ACT composite scores by race and ethnicity. We see similar trends in these data as in the benchmark data, with white students earning higher average scores than the state and students of color earning lower average scores than the state. For the 2021 school year, students identifying as Asian had the largest gap when looking at average scores of district graduates as compared to students statewide, which was a difference of 2.5 points. We also see gaps between the average scores of white students and students of color. The largest gaps were between white and black students, which was an average of 7 points, and between white and Hispanic students, which was an average of 5 points. Some positive findings were that students identifying as Hispanic and multiracial have seen a steady increase in average scores across the past 3 years.
This is a chart that was new last year. It combines graduation, dropout, and higher education enrollment data. We're looking at the education attainment status of the class of 2020 in the year following on-time graduation from high school, which was the 2021 school year. Overall, we can see that over 63% of students that were in the class of 2020 graduated in 4 years and entered higher education sometime in the 2020-21 school year. White, Asian, and female students continued to have college-going rates that were above the district average and dropout rates below the district average. The groups with the lowest college-going rates were SLIFE, homeless, special education, and EL students. This chart gives us a more complete picture of achievement gaps because it accounts for students who did not graduate when looking at higher education. For example, the gender gap in higher education enrollment increases from 11% to 18%. The black-white gap increases from 16% to 25%. Both of these gaps also grew larger from 2019 to 2020. As we did with the graduation rate data, we'll also examine race by gender as we incorporate higher education data. We find white and Asian females with by far the highest graduation rates and lowest dropout rates. In fact, the white female dropout rate is less than 0.5%. In contrast, Hispanic males stand out with the lowest graduation rates and highest dropout rates. Hispanic males are more than 20 times as likely to drop out as white females. In turn, white females are 3 times as likely to enroll in higher education. Within each racial group, female students are more likely to enroll in higher education, and males are more likely to drop out. The higher education advantage for females is 20% or higher among Asian, Black, and Hispanic students. Also, as we did last year, we'll use this chart to see how our graduation rate gaps are changing over time. We subtracted each non-white graduation rate from the white graduation rate to calculate the size of the gaps. Then we compared the class of 2013 to the class of 2020. Over these 7 years, the following groups made progress in closing 4-year graduation rate gaps: Asian, Hispanic, students receiving free or reduced price meals, and special education. However, we saw gaps increase 17% for homeless students and 10% for Black students.
As we can see identified on this slide, the following actions are being taken at the district level to positively impact this World's Best Workforce goal. In examining the very first action on this slide, we're continuing to expand our utilization of culturally responsive instructional strategies and materials to facilitate more meaningful connections between students and their learning. Members of the Department of Educational Equity have participated in our program improvement process teams. An entire assessment section on our curriculum resource evaluation rubric has been developed and utilized, focusing on educational equity. Real-time feedback is solicited from pilot teachers during pilot processes to ensure that the materials that they're piloting are culturally relevant, all as we continue to expand classroom libraries to include literature that more effectively represents the students in our classrooms.
Finally, here you will see an example of specific actions at Garden City Elementary around ensuring all racial and economic achievement gaps between students are closed. These actions illustrate the intentional focus on culturally responsive instructional practices that will occur at this site in an effort to eliminate all achievement gaps. That concludes our presentation for the evening. At this time, we welcome any questions or comments that you may have.
All right, I'll open it up. Does anybody have any comments, questions? Reflection?
Do we have any data on the implementation of AVID and any of the graduation rates or ACT or any of that?
I can speak to that one. In terms of AVID, we did conduct an AVID impact study. We've actually done that recently, it was just last year, and we did find a significant positive effect for the AVID program. The specifics of that I don't have handy, but we look at a lot of different indicators when we do impact studies. Is that helpful at all?
Was that across racial and gender groups? Or?
Right, yes, I think there's definitely evidence that different racial and gender groups are benefiting from the program.
I'm just curious because where I work, we've been doing AVID for a long time, all the way through, and the graduation rate is slightly better than here, and I think it's significant. It's been a significant
Okay.
program.
Thank you.
Just a thought.
Board members, maybe a couple of thoughts I can add to your digestion of everything. So it's really strange to see results here. There was a point last year we didn't think we would be doing MCAs at all because of where we were with COVID. We had 5,000 kids, and Distance Learning Academy had to figure out how, Jeremy and his team and many others had to figure out how to bring those grade levels in to participate in the testing during that window of time. So there was so many logistical things we just thought, wow, how's that going to happen? But it did happen, and we got it done. And I think these, then we wondered whether the results would be even useful to us. Can we use this to drive change, right? Well, kind of on the heels of your earlier discussion on the operational plan, and, you know, what I get excited about is now having a framework to work off of. So with the board setting strategic directions, and now we begin to articulate more clearly our operational plan and the specific actions we're going to take to address these. Just a month or two ago, we basically walked through all the curricular changes we're making, large changes in multiple academic areas to try to drive improvement with materials and strategies and instruction. Math, science, ELA, SEL. The racial gaps we saw is why we tackled the ECAP process, to really dive into getting some real specific actions to come about that and building that into our plan as well. To Michael's credit, we redesigned our equity department and the structure there to provide stronger supports at the schools, driving those results for not only departments but into the school improvement plans. Those vision cards that we talked about earlier are going to really help us. We haven't had that, in the last 3 years. We haven't had that level of specificity in focusing our results across multiple areas. We're auditing or doing that opportunity review with our special education department. So there's a number of actions. You saw some real concrete building examples here, but I'm just kind of reflecting on some of the larger scale changes that we believe if we do well, begin to turn this. Oddly enough, in a couple areas we disrupted the downward trend in some areas and interrupted that and at least started to turn that against the state. But then I keep reflecting on, depending on where you were looking in the state last year, districts are either in distance learning, in hybrid, or in person. And our middle school and high school kids had the least amount of in-person time because of the way the COVID, data was trending. We had a little more time with elementary students in person, and we all agree that's where the best learning happens, right? We've had many of those conversations. So as we unpack this and have had conversations, a lot of variables at play. But again, the data grounds us, and we use that to regain focus and alignment to what you've done now for us is give us that platform of the strategic plan that we can now align to operationalizing those things, measuring better those elements with departments and school improvement, all the way down to the individual level. And if you saw in there, as Mr. Lehan pointed out, strategies, action measures, and those responsible. So very clear lines of how we get these things accomplished moving forward. So I don't know if that gives you some added context. I, again, wanted to say thank you, Jeremy and team, for putting this together for us tonight. So I'll turn it back, Chair Dawson, to you just for more questions.
Sorry. I had some questions, but I got a little sidetracked by Jackie's question. So I was wondering if we could get maybe a refresher on the AVID impact study, just to, while we're talking about this topic, if you could just send us to our board email address, like the results of that. I think it would help us as we move forward. And I actually did notice in one of the slides that Michael Lehan was discussing for Osseo Senior High that was included in that site improvement thing process. So I think that's really great. I remember hearing about that before, how we were doing well with that, and continuing to evaluate and include into our vision cards and all the things that we're doing. We've talked about this many times, but making sure that strategies we know that are working continue to move forward, and that we continue to invest in those strategies, and when we discover strategies that are not working or are causing harm, that we eliminate them and reevaluate them. I did have a question. I'm trying to find it as I was taking notes here. I'm sorry. You might have to come back.
Okay.
That's fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for all of your work putting data together and connecting it to actions. And I really appreciate the format and how it's all laid out. I have a question about science. I'm really happy to see that our student scores have increased. I think you said 12%. But I'm wondering, our science scores are still really low. with the updates to our science curriculum, when do you think that we'll start seeing results that can be reported on that?
Sure. Well, currently, we're in the process, if we're talking about science, in particular at the elementary level, of going through that science pilot that I believe Superintendent McIntyre referenced that we spoke to a month ago. So our hope is that we'll reach a successful conclusion for that pilot and be able to make a recommendation on a curriculum resource that we can adopt, then purchase, provide teachers with the prerequisite professional development they need to be successful, and then implement immediately in the fall. So when you think about that implementation for next year, obviously there are bumps along the way as teachers are, my joke, whether it's inappropriate or not, is kind of learning a new language around a new curriculum resource. In fairness to them, it takes a good run-through to really help them feel as though they're comfortable with it. I see Jackie nodding her head in agreement. And really feel skilled to be able to deliver it in the ways that they want in front of their students. So I'm hopeful we'll see those returns within the next couple of years. At the secondary level, our implementation of different curriculum resources has been what I would describe as phased, in the sense that I think Dr. Kind spoke to resources being implemented at different grade levels at different points in time. So we'll see those results kind of stagger out over time as well.
Okay, thank you. My next question is about the literacy. It seems like that individualized approach that we talk a lot about is really important, and I just wanted to check and make sure that we have all the resources and all the right kind of people trained in order to do that, because it's incredibly labor intensive, screening and monitoring and testing and supporting each of these students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the most exciting things that we have going on this year, that's new this year, is and I can't recall the extent to which we've had an opportunity or to which I've spoken about this with you in the past, but just with the ability to provide on-site reading and math interventionist as a result of our ADSES funding that we applied for last March, and were awarded beginning this school year, which has allowed us to be able to have interventionists at every single one of our school sites, focusing exclusively on progress monitoring, the implementation of interventions with fidelity in the areas of reading and mathematics, in addition to some of the programming that they've had previously. So we're really excited about this programming, and yes, there are additional people that are there to help with that data collection and that assessment piece, which can be overwhelming, absolutely. But it's something that we're really excited to see the results for as we get closer, as we move throughout the course of the year and as we get to the end of the school year. So that will be something exciting to share with you, I think, down the road.
Okay, thank you. And then one more question. I think the example for culturally responsive teaching was just at one of our sites. Am I correct to assume that culturally responsive teaching will be developed for each site, for the needs of each site?
I think it's fair to say that that's a focal point at every site.
Okay.
The idea that Assistant Superintendent Lehan and I had was just trying to highlight one example.
Yeah.
Believe me when I tell you I had many sites want to share their school improvement plans with us, and so it was hard to pick and choose. But in this instance, I just chose Garden City. So, but
Okay.
yes, that's a very fair assumption.
Director Grady, I would also add that many of our school sites are part of the NUA cohort, National Urban Alliance, which is directly responsive in that regard of culturally relevant instruction. So we have cohorts moving through that model as well.
Okay. One last question. A lot of the supports we're talking about is helping shore up kids' experience and proficiency in math. Will there also be an expansion of math opportunities so that kids have an opportunity to grow their math skills more before they go to college?
What are you thinking of specifically?
I know with acceleration and middle school being an option, it seemed like both my kids finished their math really quickly and then weren't taking math
Sure.
in high school. So it seemed like, well, yeah, that's great, they finished their standards, but shouldn't they continue to take math?
One of the things that I think that we developed in response to that exact question, and I can't remember, maybe Michael knows, but I think it was somewhere in the area of 3 to 4 years ago, we started to focus on that exact pocket of students that were subject to accelerating out of mathematics by the time they were in 11th or 12th grade. So in an extension to some of that AP math programming and some of those other math offerings that we have at the high school, we created an even more advanced class called multivariable calculus as a means to continue or to maintain that continuity of learning in the area of mathematics that students have access to. So that's an exciting opportunity that we put into place. So maybe that's something to think about down the road.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I remember my question, it's just a quick one. This was on one of Tom's slides, the four-year graduation rate gaps. I was just curious why you chose, or if there was a particular reason why 2013 compared to 2020 was used. I'm sure there were lots of variables between all the different years.
2013 was the first year that we had data in the same formula. So with the graduation rate formula gets applied is consistent back to that time.
Thank you.
Yep.
So this is a lot of data, but I didn't hear a lot of insights as to what we've been working on and what we think contributed to these results positively or negatively. And I do see the improvement actions are pretty similar to improvement actions from the past. So what I'm really trying to understand, and if it's too early, I understand that, but what I would have liked to have seen was the connection of results with the work that we've been doing to intentionally impact these results. Now I know COVID throws a wrench in that, so if that's why we don't have it in that framework and in that way of thinking, I understand that. But we have to get to the place where we're saying this is what we intentionally did to create change in the results. We think this contributed to it positively or it was not successful. And I'm just not seeing that put together in this particular presentation. But when I look at what the outcomes were, that wasn't an outcome that was described to expect for tonight. It did say examine the various data points and learn about our strategic improvement actions. So that's something that I'm really focused on, especially when we think about our strategic plans and where we go with the vision cards, to be specific about what we're doing to change this, because sitting in this seat for the third year, it's not moving in the right direction. We haven't had a lot of opportunity to implement change as we would have liked 2-3 years ago, and we've had a lot of disruption, to which you rightly pointed out. I think when I look at the state results, so we improved relative to the state, but we didn't improve, the state got worse, a lot worse, and I think that's well known and has been written about. And I think it's to our credit that we did not see those same outcomes that the state did, that it would suggest to me that we did a better job during COVID in ensuring that our students had access to the full education and we were providing the support. So I think that's a significant piece that should be pointed out, is we, in my observation, correct me if I'm wrong, outperformed the state in that regard. So I'm looking forward as we move from here through the strategic plan, through the vision cards, that we're really tying the actions. And you had some great commentary about the AVID program and the success we're seeing there, and I would have loved to have seen that paired with this type of data where it says, you know, we are doing this and it's positively impacting it, but we have these other things that are maybe other causes. And I know there is, we've talked about this at length before, there's too many variables to simply say it's this or it's that, but we have to have some type of benchmarks to know that what we're investing in is producing the results intended, or we need to pivot. So I appreciate the data, and I look forward to the work with the vision cards and the measurements to really tie it all together. So thank you for the work to put this
I appreciate
Director-
that feedback.
Director Sorry.
Sorry, go ahead. I don't know who's talking, it's
All
like so many
talking.
echoes.
We're all talking at the same time. Thank you, Director Simons. I think we share your perspective. When I reflect on where we were at a year ago, it was so heavy on operations. Just how do we, remember those indicators? They were all, everything from staffing to transportation to cleaning to, it was heavy on operations in crisis, right? In building a hybrid model, we built that distance learning academy overnight, right? So I appreciate you acknowledging that, because I think there was some silver linings in there. And a credit to our staff, our teachers and others who found a way, whatever model we were in, and we moved in and out of a lot of them, to kind of, we always, adapted, and we're not happy with those results. So I think we share your desire to have that focus and that intensity back on it, that academic achievement, and not have to be so, consumed with operational things. So I just wanted to say we share your perspective and excitement about where we're going.
Director Simons, I'll just add to your point, we actually have a study that we're doing in the process of doing this year looking at NUA and AVID. So looking at those cohorts, what is the high operational practices between those two delivery models, and seeing what the outcomes and how those scholars are performing when they have access to those. Because there's some similar strategies between the two of them, and we know that AVID is only at one high school, it's at 3 of the 4 middle schools at this time, and it's at 1 elementary site. So that's not, we have NUA represented more broadly at the elementary site, not so much at the secondary site. So how can we begin to study those, figure out what is the high operational practices, and then create some sort of alignment between those two deliverables. And as Jeremy also mentioned, obviously the ADSES, collecting some data, reading and math there. So yes, and then summer learning. One of the pieces that we're also looking at is how many credits do we accelerate over the summer just based on what happened last year with COVID and so forth. So point well taken, and hopefully at the end of this year we'll be able to answer your questions with pretty good clarity and information.
Thank you.
Michael, with the ECHO, I didn't hear the other program. You said AVID and another program?
NUA.
Okay.
Did you have something else you were going to ask?
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with FastBridge. Am I to understand that 40 to 50% of our kids are at risk for intervention in looking at that data?
Yeah, what slide were you referring to? Is it the early reading? Maybe?
I think it's like the 6th slide or something.
It's third graders can read at grade level. Right after that, the FastBridge assessment. And you've got low risk and very low risk. I don't know what the other indicators are.
It's your first slide of the 3rd grade section.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so, yeah, okay. Yeah, so those would be the students that are, the students represented in those bars are the ones that are at low risk or at very low risk, and those students are less likely to need intervention and more likely to be on track to be college and career ready. That doesn't necessarily mean that if a student qualified as being at some risk or high risk, that they aren't going to be able to meet grade level standards, but it's a piece of information that we look at among many indicators for what students might need in terms of supports.
So that's the piece I was missing, is the some risk and
yep, and high risk.
And high risk.
Yep.
So the some risk and high risk students, that's just one piece on whether or not they get interventions?
Yeah.
It's because that's 40 to 50% of our students are in that piece. So it's just like a kind of like a flag.
Yeah.
Here's a flag we want to see, kind of watch here.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So, did you have something else? I guess I can't tell. My question is, and this is kind of along the lines of Director Simons, is this is the 3rd year we've seen these results. My question is, what's ailing us here? There's power in education, and there's a cost when there are these stark disparities in graduation rates. And in America, education has, it is the key to unlocking dreams. It absolutely is. It puts us on a path forward. I understand that our educators, have been under more stress than ever, and so are our parents, and so are our students, but I would be remiss if I said these results are unacceptable. I am hopeful that our strategic roadmap, we've all of us, all of the district leadership and teachers and stakeholders in our community have put into this, but I look at the honor and integrity and holding ourselves, each other, and our system to the highest standards to create the best conditions of learning, and I take that very seriously. And when I look at these graduation rates and the stark disparities, we're in a state of crisis. That's how I feel. And it makes me look at this and say, do we need to even be stronger in our expectations and what we want and for our district to unleash and enhance the brilliance of our scholars to thrive and change the world. So I'm hopeful for that. And I don't mean that in a condescending way, because I know our staff are working really hard. It's just that I just can't keep looking at this. Every time I see this, I'm like, oh my gosh! Like, it's just, I don't care what the state says. I want to be better, and I think that's my my vision, and what I want for each and every one of our students. Anything less than that is unacceptable.
I think you hear me? Mm-hmm. I think we share that. Thank you, Chair Dawson Walton. And you made me think of last year walking through the hallway with Principal Vernig at Osseo Senior in April and thinking that our freshmen had only been there 2 weeks all year, right? Those are the kind of realities that some of these data present. And we had some success here, and we have clearly urgency and a very strong, I hope you see it as in the way our planning is trying to come together and really driving it down to the classroom level. That's been our focus all along, is how do we impact the classroom. And I really appreciate Director Mosqueda-Jones' question as well. So we probably have a larger percentage than we've ever had of students potentially needing support coming off of what we've been through. So how do we systematically do that differently? Jeremy, how many conversations have we had around how do we do instruction differently? How do we meet those kind of needs that are presenting in new ways that we've never seen? So I agree with you. I would think Mr. Lehan and our whole team would say they're unacceptable to us as well. So we are constantly like, what can we do within the capacity of what we have to do in a different way, whether it's materials and instruction and curriculum or the strategies that we use. We're adding in that social and emotional learning component. We've added, the mental health supports that we've all seen are so magnified over the last year and a half too. So all those things really, I think, have to come together to see better results, because it's a lot of things that have to be in alignment. I wish it was only one thing. We'd have probably solved it by now. So I appreciate all the board members' perspectives and observations, because it really reinforces to us how do we move forward to impact the system in a new way.
Thank you. Anybody have anything else?
I just wanted to make a final comment. Kelsey, both you and Tanya made some acknowledgments about how long we've been dealing with this, and I really think it's even more than 3 years. This has been going on for a very, very long time, and it's really hard to look at these numbers year after year after year and see, that when we get to graduation, 9%-ish over those years of kids are either unknown or still continuing. They haven't graduated. By the time we get there, they're not walking at graduation, and that's a really hard thing when we're talking about the number of students that is throughout our district. And when we see that in third grade, we've got them struggling super hard. I feel like, to me, it feels like every year that I've been here, we've failed those kids every single year, and we're not getting them where they need to be, when we know that this third grade indication is what potentially most strongly impacts our graduation rates, based on data and research that we've done up to this point extensively, not just here in our district, but throughout our state and throughout our nation. But I also really am feeling quite concerned about the really significant disparities, and we haven't talked about this here tonight as much, but our young male students, it's not, and particularly our young male students of color, every single one of them is in that 60%-ish category for graduation, and we've got to really put a strong emphasis on what we're doing to positively impact those students so that they are successful in life. And I just really wanted to make sure we call attention to those groups specifically, and that issue, and tying our learnings to making sure that what we're doing is helping them and elevating them to the level that we know they can achieve. Because every child in our district is capable of success, and we know that, and we want to provide that for them. And I know that, like Kelsey had mentioned, every teacher, every administrator, everybody in this room is working really hard to achieve that, and we've been through a really rough, I'd say basically 18 months at this point. We're still playing catch up from COVID, and who knows how long that will be, but I feel like right now, knowing this information and the negative impacts of COVID and how significantly all students were impacted, but particularly our kids that are graduating this year, what can we do right now today to make sure that those kids are on track to graduate by the end of this year? And I know we've got lots of steps in place for that, but really just making sure that we're all working together to make sure those kids graduate is really, really important, because it is devastating every time we look at this, to see how we're not serving our students the way that we intend to. So, thank you.
Before we move on to this topic, I would note we're meeting tonight on Monday because of the Brooklyn Park Youth Mentoring Fair tomorrow. And really that's just one example of how we need community engagement around our youth across our district in every single city that makes up this district. And so I really think that this is an appropriate time to draw attention to that and to ask people to participate, to show up, to think about how the community across this district can engage differently to support our youth, because it doesn't happen just at school. We know that it's not just, the school cannot solve every problem that our youth are dealing with, and we need to have community coming together around this, all of this. This is not going to be solved just by the people in this room. This has to be solved by our community and stepping up to support our youth. So come out, please come out to that event in Brooklyn Park. And that's just really one event when we're talking about our youth.
What time is it at again?
6:30, I believe. We could get it out there.
Yeah.
You beat me to it. And the theme there is relationships and connection. I think to Director Douglas's point, when we think dropout rates, where I was like, as long as we can maintain connections and strong relationships with students, we have a chance to keep them engaged and our family engaged with us and get them to that graduation point. Especially in this past year, we've seen a higher mobility rate, like around the country, around the state, around the metro, a lot more just families under stress and having to move and relocate and a lot of things like that. So the more we look at how do we do better if students are moving in or out of our district, how can we be prepared for that and make those connections? So one of the things we can do is tomorrow night at that kind of event where we can put our resources together and wrap around with our community partners. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right. Yeah.
We have time for a break. I think if we can we come back at 7:45? We'd be
Yes.
on time. Okay, board members, we're back, and I think, just want to announce, with our new equipment, we, I think, had lost our feed there for a bit, but it sounds like it's back. So, thanks for everyone for being patient with us on that. So our third agenda item tonight is our long-range financial planning budget parameters. And as we, again, near the finalization of that strategic roadmap plan and our final draft of it, including, our one-year calendar, our three-year operational plan, and so forth, and those vision cards that are coming, we're beginning to leverage that portfolio to assist us in developing the associated budget for each fiscal year. So you've heard me talk about this since I've started with the district, that continuing to try to shift our practice in setting those priorities to guide the budgeting process. And we're still kind of working through that transition. But by working to set those priorities for each upcoming year and then developing that budget around those priorities, we're going to find greater alignment. So we're getting closer to that reality. And tonight is about our team giving some updated guidance to our general process, including to our budget managers. And we have a great team with us again once here tonight. John Morstad, Executive Director of Finance and Operations, Kelly Benusa, our Director of Business Services, Jeff Ansorge, our Director of Food and Nutrition Services, and Brian Severson Hall, Executive Director of Community Engagement, along with other team members. Mike and others are here supporting as well. So with that in mind, I'll turn it over to John. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Dawson Walton, Superintendent McIntyre, school board members, and everyone else in attendance. This evening's presentation will represent the school board's first interaction with the long-range financial planning, or what will be regularly referred to as LRFP process, for the fiscal 2023 budget cycle. Before we get into some of the details of this year's process, I want to set the table for the information that will be presented this evening. As a reminder to the board members and to our community, the LRFP process is a well-established and thorough budgeting process that involves multiple stakeholders, has regular touch points with the school board, is designed to ensure that our limited resources are allocated in the best way possible to support our mission and strategic priorities. As Superintendent McIntyre mentioned, the LRFP, in item 1 for the LRFP section of your packet, we've applied the guiding change document to the LRFP process to identify our current realities, unacceptable means, and desired results. I'll let you browse that at your leisure. We've also included the 3-year operational plan focusing on fiscal year 23 to identify our strategic directions and the goals within the LRFP process. And if you turn to item 3 in your board packet, you will see the model that illustrates the LRFP process, and just wanted to highlight a couple items here for you. The dark blue circle is the mission, which thank you for passing and giving the official update on the other one, so we will get that incorporated into this before you see it again. The gray ovals are the work of the budget managers. This group meets regularly throughout the process. Currently, we're at step number 4. The Business Services Department gave preliminary direction based on the guiding change document to ensure a zero-based budgeting approach. So any increase in budget capacity requested to support, to support our strategic directions or other work for fiscal 23 must have a decrease in another area to ensure no increase to the overall budget. The teal boxes around the outside represent the school board's role through the LRFP process. Today we are in the lower right box where we identify the annual budget targets. As always, the guiding principles are listed in the upper right that we use throughout the process. Now I'd like to introduce Kelly Benusa, Director of Business Services, who's going to walk us through our current financial projections, which include some assumptions related to finances and enrollment. One item to note on the enrollment, when we created the financial projection for fiscal 2022, we made the assumption that we would recover about 50% of the students we lost in the previous year, and then another 25% in fiscal 23. In reality, we recovered about 32% of the students in 22. And so we want to use that information as we're working through our enrollment projections for 2023. We want to take that into consideration to determine if we need to change that 25% goal to something a little more realistic. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kelly.
the first document I'm going to discuss this evening is the PAIR narrative. So this is our program efficiency, abandonment, and redirective narrative. The PAIR asks 6 key questions. What resources are being requested? The second question is around a description of the proposal. The third item is to identify and respond to the influence of race and culture in the development of the request, which is a connection to the mission and strategic plan, and also to the guiding principles that John discussed in the framework. It also is talking about what data will be used to measure results, and then how does the request support equitable student achievement. So again, it's a process connection to our guiding principles. The fifth item is a proposal impact and rationale, and then the sixth item is legal requirements. So the PAIR narrative is used for completing the LRFP analysis at the January 21st LRFP advisory team meeting. It's a continuous improvement process which is built into LRFP, and we utilize surveys and then the April debrief meeting to review feedback for potential changes to the process. The next document in your packages is the fiscal year 28 through 23 school board approved budget adjustments, which impact programs and services. This document shows revenue and expenditure adjustments for the past 4 years, the current year, and projects next year. With one exception, in fiscal year 2020, changes in enrollment were embedded within the LRFP process. So when possible, we keep reductions as far from the direct instruction as possible. For fiscal year 2018, we redeployed $500,000, and then we added $450,000 outside of the LRFP process for teaching and support staff. In 2019, we redeployed $521,000. In fiscal year 20, we redeployed $1.4 million. We also added $381,000 for class size outliers due to enrollment increase. And then we added $195,000 for co-located services for 1 year only outside of LRFP. In fiscal year 21, we eliminated the $195,000 for the co-located services with 1 year only budget capacity. And then we utilized a combination of revenue increases and redeployment of almost $1.9 million. We added $478,000 for class size outliers due to enrollment increases that were projected, and then we eliminated those in fiscal year 21 with our mid-year budget revision due to our fall 2020 enrollment decrease. We also added $343,000 for strategic investments. For the current year we're in, fiscal year 22, we adjusted $2.1 million for class size outliers and 279 online due to enrollment increases. These will be eliminated in the fiscal year 22 mid-year budget revision due to the enrollment being under projection, which John just discussed. We also reduced $2.4 million due to the enrollment decline in fiscal year 21. And then we added $2.8 million for strategic priorities. The next document is the historical budget trend. We manage our fund balance to stay above our 5% minimum within the board policy, which is the red line on this graph. It shows 10 years worth of data. For fiscal year 22, it shows the current budget and 9 years of prior year actual data. For fiscal year 22, the adopted budget has a planned fund balance spend down of $16 million. You can see that the green bar is smaller than the blue bar, and actual results show that revenue is greater than expenditures in the past 8 of the 9 years shown on this graph. The next set of documents are the organizational complements, and this information shows detail for the general operating transportation, food and nutrition services, and community service and capital funds. We utilize the LRFP process for budgeting, and we document the changes from the prior year. This document's on our district website under the budget document. And this document's important because it shows what we're buying for fiscal year 22. The next document in your packet is the benchmark districts. We have 8 financial benchmark districts, and we worked with Fiscal and Forecast 5, which is a data analytical company, to determine which districts are our benchmark comparisons. So just to walk through the document briefly, this document shows a comparison of the 21 student demographics for each of those benchmark districts. It shows where, as of November 21, their operating referendum and capital levies are, at for each of those districts. And then it also asks the revenue assumptions and expenditure assumptions for fiscal years 23 and 24. And then it also asks the question about anticipated reductions in those next 2 years. And then it asks, what's your fiscal year 22 anticipated unassigned fund balance? And then what is your board policy? So at this point in time, we have 5 districts that were able to share information this early on in the process. For November of 21, I think it's important to note that ANOCA approved the renewal of their expiring operating referendum and capital levy, and the additional increase of $275 for operating referendum authority failed to pass. Also, South Washington approved a revoke and replace of operating referendum, increasing their capacity from $1,537 to $1,886 per student. The capital levy question, which was an increase of $5 million, also failed to pass. This also shows that for November of 2022, there are 2 districts that are considering requests for operating referendums, capital levies, as well as building bonds. The next document is the estimated major cost drivers. Again, just to orient everyone back to this spreadsheet, what this document does is it takes our expenditures for 22 and breaks them out into those big broad categories of salaries, benefits, purchase services, and supplies for a total of $268.4 million. And then we have our percent change projected for fiscal year 23 of 3%. So that would show that we could grow at that level a little over $8 million. And so this is the starting point for expenditures, and it uses our prior year trend data as a starting point. For fiscal year 23, we fill in this document as information becomes available. And at this point in time, we have 2.01% identified of the 3%, which is consistent with prior years. The next document in your packet is the fiscal year 2023 budget planning timeline for the operating fund budgets. These are key dates in our budget process, and the items in blue are where the board takes action. So just to highlight a few of those dates, on November 16th, we'll be asking the board to accept the fiscal year 2021 audit results. In December, we'll be asking the board to approve the fiscal year 2023 levy limitation certification. And in February, we'll have a work session with the LRFP adjustments as well as our mid-year and our capital expenditure budget. And then in February of 22nd, we'll be asking the board to approve the adjustments for our mid-year, for 22, approve our 23 capital budget, and then approve our 23 operating fund adjustments. And then in June, we'll come back to the board and ask for approval of the 23 operating, capital, and non-operating fund budgets. The next document in your packet is the fiscal year 22 adopted expenditure budgets for all budgeted funds. The LRFP process was started back in fiscal year 2010. And again, we utilize this for all of our budgeted funds with the exception of debt service, which is highlighted here in orange. The pie chart shows the size of funds in relation to each other. And at the beginning of fiscal year 22, we had an adopted budget for those funds of $330.4 million. So moving on to the base and recommended tactics for the General Operating Transportation Fund. So just a bit of context and history. The strategic priorities was brought forward for LRFP with 2 goals and outcomes. The first was to build a framework, which was one of the first documents that John went over this evening. And the second was to design a long-range financial forecast model, which is this document right here. The format is the same for all of our other funds. It includes 9 years of data. The base, which is in the color blue for this fund, shows if we do nothing. The tactics, which is in gray, utilizes revenues and expenditures to impact our long-term budget forecast. We update this document at key points in the process, at the adoption of the budget in June, for year-end results and for levy adjustments. So September, October, November, this document could get adjusted. We update for our 5-year enrollment projections and mid-year budget adjustments, usually in February. And then we have, different for this year, we have revised it for the November 1 enrollment. Again, we're down 134 students from that 50% recapture number from that loss from 2021 that we experienced. This is the only change in the document since September, and that number is in the adopted 22 column. So if we go down to the gray section under revenues, it's the last revenue item in that section. Then if we go to the bottom of the expenditure tactics in that same row, or same column, the operating reductions remain unchanged from September. So utilizing those revenues for expenditures and revenues, we show that we do not need to do any reductions for fiscal year 23, which is the budget year that we're planning for. And that for combined 24 through 26 fiscal years, we have $11 million of operational reductions that we're looking at this time. And at this point in the presentation, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Jeff to walk us through the food nutrition basin tactic.
Good evening. Nice to see you all.
Good evening.
Getting to that age where I need my readers. So the food nutrition budget projections, page 81. If you're looking at actual of 2021, our fund balance down at the bottom, we had an increase of almost $1.3 million, which was a nice return from the previous year, where we were down almost $1.7 million as a result of the initial onset of COVID. So looking at 22 at the top of the page, revenues, we had projected $15,715,000 in 2022 for revenue, and it seems a bit higher than our average of $13 million, and that projection was due to, at the point of this, we were assuming that we were going to be providing weekend meals still, and we now know that that's not a possibility for us. So you see in red on 2022, known adjustments to revenue, we adjusted down $1.7 million, and then we also adjusted down 1.5, a little bit over that in expenditures that go in line with food costs, labor costs, supplies, and other operating expenses. So in 2022, ultimately, we're projecting a fund balance increase of just about $1.1 million as well. So, and then when you move over to 2023, we'll get back in line with our $13 million on average revenues for the year. It shows $13,994,000 in revenue, but it says known adjustments for this one, but I'm thinking this is more of an assumption. We're making a reduction in revenue assumption of almost $800,000, so that's $796,000. We're assuming that we're going to reset from our summer food service program reimbursement back to a national school lunch program, where that reimbursement is significantly lower than the SFSP. So that's where that comes in. Then you see a decrease in the expenditures that correlate with that decrease in revenue. So in 2023, ultimately, we're looking at a projected slight loss of fund balance if everything remains constant, as you see here. And at the bottom left, our fund balance target is 12% for our fund. And all the way across from 2023 to 2026, you see we're still well above that 12% fund balance. So we're not projecting any operational reductions in this projection through 2026. And I guess the last note would be the food nutrition fund balance is separate from the general fund, so we don't use their funds. We use our own funds for our capital expenditures and all the other expenses. So I think that's all I've got for you at this point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. All right, good evening. I'm Brian Severson Hall, and I'll walk us through Fund 4, the Community Service Fund. And in this last summer, I had opportunity to kind of give a more extensive update on kind of impact of community ed, and COVID with community ed. So I'll be a little more summative tonight. But we'll start with the revenue line across the top. Again, this really shows you, when you look through the years, through actual 2018 all the way through projected 2026, at least a mini roller coaster ride right there, right? You see a significant dip in revenue over the last couple of years, and then you see slight increases over the next 4 to 5 years. So similar to some of the goals the school district set around our student if I wanted to say attendance, what's enrollment, thank you, student enrollment. We're kind of setting 2-year goals of trying to get back about 25% of our participation that we lost over, and you can see then over 4 years where that kind of gets the increase. It's hard to know for sure, that's a little bit speculative, but that's our goal, and as I've shared before, really depending on the program area, participation is coming back more slowly or more quickly. So, but we're just saying 25% overall, and we're excited to try to rebuild back our participation. And in the gray tactics section, you can see where that 25% is represented. And one of the things that's stated often when we share with this fund, when we typically see an increase in revenue, we also see that in shown in expenditures, and you can see that with the 1.7 million in anticipated revenue and 1.5 in expenditures. You'll also see in the gray tactics area an anticipated program growth and operational adjustments of 200,000. What that represents is bringing back of some positions that we eliminated in June of 2020. I'm happy to say we're doing that. It's very slow, but just in October, we brought back 2 of the 5 program managers that we eliminated in June of 2020. And 2 weeks ago, we brought back one of my 5 clerical AESPs that we eliminated in June in 2020. So it's not as quick as I would love it to be, but we're committed to bringing positions back as we grow back our program. You also see on the fund balance target line, we're anticipating fund balance of 16.8%. I typically try to have that